The early morning of June 6, 1944, exactly 5 o'clock, the Crisbeck battery, located on the Normandy coast, was preparing for fateful events. First Lieutenant Walter Omsen, the battery commander, peered intently at the horizon through his binoculars. A slight tremor ran through his hands as he grasped the scale of what he saw. What unfolded before his eyes completely contradicted the overconfident pronouncements of the High Command. The English Channel, which was supposed to serve as a reliable barrier on the Third Reich, its western flank had transformed into a bustling steel highway. Countless vessels, like a colossal armada, stretched from one end of the horizon to the other. Their dark silhouettes merged into a single, relentlessly advancing mass. The invasion, as it turned out, comprised a colossal force of 6,139 vessels of various types, 1,113 warships, 426 landing ships, 736 auxiliary ships, and 864 merchant vessels. This armada was crewed by over 195,000 sailors, representing 8 allied nations. At 5:52 a.m., Omsen's battery received the long-awaited order to open fire. Just 3 minutes later, at 5:55 a.m., the first shells from the 210 mm Czech-made Skoda guns hurtled towards the enemy fleet. It was a desperate attempt to halt the approaching tsunami, but the forces were clearly unequal. Omsen's battery engaged in a fierce firefight with the American cruisers USS Tuscaloosa and USS Quincy, as well as the battleship USS Nevada. At 6:30 a.m., the German artillerymen achieved a success. The accurate fire destroyed the destroyer, USS Corrie, making it the only American destroyer lost on D-Day. The concrete observation post atop the Crisbeck battery was where the 32-year-old naval officer Omsen, the first German defender, spotted the beginning of the Allied invasion of Fortress Europe and engaged in battle. Through the eyepiece of his Zeiss rangefinder, the officer saw not just an invasion fleet, but the visible embodiment of the industrial power whose very existence Nazi propaganda denied. The relentless mathematics of defeat advanced at 8 knots, signaling the start of irreversible change. Within hours, German officers across Normandy would witness a crushing demonstration of Allied industrial potential, shattering all of their illusions about the enemy's capabilities and heralding the beginning of the end for Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 5th, ominous portents gathered. At the headquarters of Army Group B, located in La Roche-Guyon, 50 miles from the coast, Lieutenant General Hans Speidel, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Chief of Staff since April 15, 1944, tracked incoming reports with growing alarm. Rommel himself was absent, in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday, confident that weather conditions precluded any invasion attempt. At 1:20 a.m., the 7th Army reported a massive airborne landing in Normandy. Over 13,000 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were being transported by Douglas C-47 Skytrain aircraft. General of Artillery Erich Marx, commander of the 84th Corps, at his headquarters in St. Louis, instantly recognized the gravity of the situation. This Eastern Front veteran, who had lost a leg at Stalingrad, possessed a tactical acumen honed by years of brutal fighting. However, even Marx, one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced commanders, could not imagine the true scale of the impending catastrophe. The German defenders were prepared for an invasion, but they were not ready for the industrial avalanche that was about to bury them under its material superiority. In November 1943, Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruge, an experienced naval strategist, was appointed naval advisor to Field Marshal Rommel. Rouge, hailing from a family of hereditary sailors, meticulously inspected coastal fortifications for several months. Thanks to his deep understanding of naval affairs, he stood out among the German officers stationed in France. Rouge tirelessly emphasized the need to strengthen coastal defenses by installing additional minefields, erecting obstacles, and increasing the number of artillery pieces. However, as he later noted in his memoirs, Rommel in Normandy, the German army, unfortunately, was preparing for a war that had already passed, while the Allies brought with them a new generation of warfare. The German High Command, basing its assessment on its own limited capabilities, supply difficulties, and the growing exhaustion of its industry after 5 years of war, mistakenly believed that the Allies would be able to land no more than 20 divisions supported by approximately 3,000 vessels. But as the first rays of sun illuminated the Normandy coast on June 6th, German observers in bunkers and observation posts from Cherbourg to Le Havre began to report an incredible sight. Instead of hundreds of ships, thousands were moving toward the shore. It became evident that this was not merely a raid or a diversionary tactic, but the largest amphibious landing in human history. At the strategically important strongpoint WN-62, dominating the coastline that would become the infamous Omaha Beach, German soldier Gerhard Heinrich See peered intently through the narrow slit of his machine gun embrasure in the pre-dawn hours of June 6, 1944, at 5:45 a.m. This 20-year-old from the rural village of Metzing had never before seen the endless expanse of the sea until his deployment to Normandy. At that moment, he couldn't even see the ocean, only the cold steel of the gun mount. Ships were everywhere, See recalled in his memoirs years later. Huge ships, small vessels, clumsy flat-bottomed barges, destroyers scurrying back and forth like sheepdogs herding a flock. The horizon had completely disappeared. I desperately tried to count them, but gave up after 100. There were countless thousands. Along the entire 80-kilometer invasion front, German officers and soldiers experienced a similar overwhelming realization of the scale of what was happening. They were confronted not just with a numerically superior enemy, but with a fundamentally different level of military power. At 5:30 a.m., a devastating naval bombardment erupted. The Allied fleet comprised 5 battleships, 24 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and 2 monitors. For the German soldiers defending the coast, this was the first tangible lesson in American industrial might. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 shells from its powerful 350mm guns in the first hour of the battle. Each of these shells weighed 635 kilograms. Thus, in just 60 minutes, one ship unleashed 178 tons of explosives on enemy positions, more than the combined arsenal of many German artillery regiments. Even before the first Allied soldier set foot on the Normandy shore, naval forces had rained down approximately 50,000 shells from destroyers, 23,000 shells from cruisers, and 3,500 shells from battleships, a total of about 130,000 tons of explosive ordnance. General of Infantry Günther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff of the Commander-in-Chief West, later testified, "We were preparing to fight armies, but in the end we found ourselves fighting entire industrial complexes." at 6 a.m. to the accompaniment of roaring naval guns relentlessly shelling the Atlantic Wall, German soldiers became involuntary spectators to an impressive demonstration of Allied industrial power. The sky was filled not with individual squadrons, but with entire air armadas, thousands of aircraft. Allied air forces, having conducted over 14,000 sorties even before the invasion began, had secured complete air superiority. The Luftwaffe, in turn, could only counter with about 300 operational aircraft stationed across all of France. On D-Day, German aviation conducted 319 sorties, while the Allies flew 4,674. For every German aircraft in the air, there were 46 Allied aircraft. This ratio was not just unfavorable, it bordered on the absurd. Major Josef Prille, commander of JG-26, undertook the only Luftwaffe attack on the invasion beachheads that morning. With only his wingman, Heinz Wodarczyk, he strafed Sword Beach before being forced to retreat under the assault of dozens of Allied fighters. This episode, recorded in many historical accounts, became a vivid illustration of the complete helplessness of German aviation on that fateful day. Despite the crushing firepower unleashed upon the German troops defending the Normandy coast, many initially harbored hopes of holding their positions. On the infamous Omaha Beach, the German 352nd Infantry Division occupied strategically advantageous defensive lines on the steep cliffs overlooking the shore. Machine gun crews, hidden in concrete bunkers, laid down a crossfire, turning the first waves of American infantry from the 1st and 29th Divisions into a bloody slaughter. From the moment of the landing at 6:30 a.m., enemy strongpoints spewed a deadly hail of lead. Heinrich C., operating an MG-42 machine gun in the fortified strongpoint Widerstands Nest 62, fired over 12,000 rounds that morning, as confirmed by his own testimony. He witnessed American soldiers falling by the dozens, by the hundreds, their bodies carried away by the tide. The coastal waters turned crimson with spilled blood. For a brief moment it seemed as if the impregnable Atlantic Wall might withstand the Allied onslaught. However, American destroyers soon appeared on the horizon. Around 8:20 a.m., when the situation on Omaha Beach reached a critical point and General Omar Bradley seriously considered evacuation, something extraordinary happened. Disregarding the danger of running aground or hitting mines, American destroyers boldly approached the shore to within just 1,000 yards, direct firing range for naval artillery. The USS Maddox, USS Carmick, USS Doyle, and USS Frankfurt unleashed the full might of their 5-inch guns on individual German strongpoints. At such a close range, missing was virtually impossible. This daring maneuver, meticulously documented in naval reports, played a decisive role in breaking through the German defenses at Omaha. It was at this moment that German officers began to grasp the true significance of American industrial might. It was not just about the number of ships, but the willingness to risk them, to use them as expendable tools. The USS Corey was lost, but its place was immediately taken by others. Unlike the Kriegsmarine, where every ship was precious, for the Americans they were merely tools, and they had thousands of them. As time passed, a scene unfolded before the German soldiers that completely contradicted their understanding of amphibious operations. Landing craft seemed to arrive endlessly, wave after wave, hour after hour. A continuous procession of men and equipment moved from the sea to the shore. The variety of specialized vessels astonished the German observers. landing craft, tank, LCTs, unloaded 30-ton Sherman tanks directly onto the sandy beaches. Landing ship, tank, LSTs, giant vessels about 100 meters long, beached themselves and opened their bow ramps, releasing entire tank companies. UKWs, amphibious trucks, drove from the sea onto the beach and delivered supplies directly to the fighting units. By nightfall, Allied forces had landed approximately 156,000 soldiers, 132,115 by sea and 23,400 by air. These impressive forces significantly outnumbered the entire German 7th Army defending in Normandy. On the first day of the operation, the Allies achieved impressive results, landing 156,000 personnel, 20,000 vehicles, while 700 tanks and 15,000 tons of supplies. In contrast, the German 7th Army, responsible for defending the entire Normandy region, possessed fewer than 500 operational tanks. The Allies, on the other hand, landed 3 times that many on the first day. The Allied invasion of Normandy proved a harsh test for the German army, exposing not only a colossal disparity in material resources, but also a deep systemic crisis in the face of overwhelming enemy firepower. The celebrated Wehrmacht panzer divisions, which had triumphantly swept through France in just a month and a half in 1940, found themselves virtually powerless against Allied air superiority and the devastating fire of naval artillery. The 21st Panzer Division, the closest armored formation to the landing sites, launched its counter-attack many hours after the operation began, around 4 p.m. It took the division a full 3 hours to cover the short distance of 16 kilometers from Ranville to Caen. Conceived as a powerful tank thrust, this maneuver turned into a grim spectacle of burning vehicles. The remaining tanks that reached British positions near Sword Beach came under accurate naval gunfire, directed by forward observers. The British battleship HMS Warspite, positioned 24 kilometers offshore, unleashed AIM-15-inch shells on the German tanks, capable of penetrating the armor of any combat vehicle then in existence. SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer, commander of the 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, later recalled in his memoirs that the enemy's material superiority was so immense that their own forces were simply swept away like a wave breaking on a rock. The day after the triumphant Allied landings on June 7th, German aerial reconnaissance presented photographs that astonished the High Command. The Allies, contrary to expectations, were not storming fortified ports, but were constructing their own harbors directly in the open sea. The scale of the engineering marvel known as the Mulberry Harbors was astounding. These artificial ports, assembled from prefabricated elements brought from Britain, included 600,000 tons of concrete, 33 piers, 16 kilometers of floating roadways, and 93 scuttle ships serving as breakwaters. Within 2 weeks, these harbors processed 9,000 tons of cargo daily, surpassing many French ports in this regard. The Germans had spent 4 years building the impregnable Atlantic Wall to protect existing ports, but the Allies found an ingenious solution by simply eliminating the need for them. In June 1944, German military leaders gradually realized the depth of their intelligence catastrophe. Operation Fortitude, meticulously planned by the Allies, had convinced German intelligence that the Normandy landing was merely a diversion. The main thrust was supposedly being prepared in Pas-de-Calais, where a fictitious 1st US Army group under General Patton was to launch an invasion. In critical weeks, German reserves remained idle, awaiting a non-existent attack. only when documents fell into German hands, revealing Patton's true location in Normandy, commanding the very real Third Army, did General of the Panzer Troops Leo von Schweppenberg grasp the scale of their deception. As July advanced and June receded, the alarm in German officers' reports to higher headquarters reached a critical point. The Commander-in-Chief West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, was summoned by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel of the OKW, who demanded an explanation for why the Allied invasion had not yet been eliminated. In response to Keitel's question about what to do next, Rundstedt, without mincing words, suggested making peace, emphasizing the futility of further resistance. For such candor, Rundstedt was immediately relieved of his post. On June 17, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel met with Hitler in France. According to documented evidence, Rommel presented grim statistics testifying to the hopeless position of German troops, complete Allied air superiority, German divisions at 30% of their authorized strength, and the impossibility of daytime movement due to intense enemy naval artillery fire. In response, Hitler categorically forbade any retreat, demanding fanatical resistance. Rommel left the meeting with a realization of Germany's inevitable collapse. Within a month, he became involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler, planned for July 20th, and was subsequently forced to take his own life. Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff who survived the war, later emphasized in his book Invasion 1944, Rommel and the Normandy campaign. The defeat was caused not so much by the enemy's superiority in military training or strategy, but by the overwhelming Allied superiority in material resources. The battle for Caen vividly highlighted the futility of desperate Germans' resistance in the face of overwhelming Allied material superiority. On one July day, specifically July 7th, an impressive armada of 467 Royal Air Force heavy bombers unleashed a devastating barrage on Caen, dropping approximately 2,500 tons of bombs in 40 minutes. A truly monstrous force, exceeding the entire arsenal of the Luftwaffe stationed in France. Germany's elite 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, which entered the Battle of Normandy with 20,540 men and 150 tanks, lost virtually all its strength just 6 weeks later, reduced to 300 soldiers and stripped of all its armor, with approximately 8,000 servicemen falling in the bloody slaughter of the Falaise Pocket. Operation Cobra, the triumphant American breakout from Normandy that began on July 25th, was undeniable proof of absolute Allied superiority. During a massive carpet bombing aimed at a narrow area just 6,000 by 2,200 yards, when 1,500 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers unleashed 300 tons of deadly ordnance on the enemy. Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of a panzer division caught in the epicenter of this infernal fire, bitterly stated, "My division was wiped out. We are not fighting an army, but an industrial complex." The Panzer Lehr division, which entered Normandy with 190 tanks and 16,000 men, simply ceased to exist. Of the 3,000 soldiers in the impact zone, 1,000 were killed instantly, another 1,000 were wounded, and the remaining 1,000 were so psychologically shattered that they lost the ability to fight. Tragic instances of friendly fire during the operation resulted in the deaths of 111 American servicemen and the wounding of 490, including Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, the highest-ranking U.S. officer killed in action in the European theater of operations. However, even these regrettable losses could not shake the operation's success, confirming the unwavering resolve and power of the Allied forces. From August 12th to 21st, 1944, the Falaise Pocket became a vast graveyard for German forces fighting in Normandy. Surviving accounts paint a horrific picture of the defeat. Between 10,000 and 15,000 Wehrmacht soldiers died. 40,000 to 50,000 were captured. And on the northern front, 344 armored vehicles, including tanks and self-propelled guns, were destroyed. Additionally, 2,447 unarmored vehicles and 252 artillery pieces were left in the battlefield. Although 20,000 to 50,000 German soldiers managed to escape the encirclement, they were merely demoralized remnants of a once formidable army, having lost their combat effectiveness. The German General Staff struggled to grasp that what was unfolding on the front was no longer just military action, but rather the resolution of a complex industrial problem, one in which Germany was clearly losing. To illustrate, a comparison of military equipment production in 1944 clearly demonstrates the overwhelming industrial superiority of the Allies. In 1944, Germany produced 39 807 aircraft, reached a peak in tank production in December with 1,954 units, and manufactured 68,000 military trucks. In the same year, American industry produced 96,000 aircraft, 29,000 tanks, and 650,000 military trucks. It is important to note that these figures do not include the production volumes of Great Britain, Canada, and the Soviet Union. Thus, Germany was effectively fighting against the entire world's industrial might, while possessing the production capacity of only a medium-sized country, which was also steadily weakening under incessant bombing raids. The total volume of American military production included 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, 2 million army trucks, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. General Franz Halder, former chief of the General Staff, calculated after the war that by 1944 the Allies surpassed Germany in military production by approximately 5 times. In some categories, such as truck production, this superiority reached tenfold. According to him, we were not defeated in battle. We were mathematically eliminated. The Normandy campaign left an indelible mark on the minds of German officers, forcing them to re-evaluate not only the military situation, but also the fundamental principles of Nazi ideology. The collapse of the myth of German superiority and the supposed weakness of the Americans became a painful revelation for them. This was particularly difficult for young officers who had been indoctrinated with Nazi propaganda. They had been taught that Americans were soft, incapable of real warfare. However, when confronted with reality, they saw an army equipped with advanced technology, an efficient communication system, unlimited resources, and unwavering confidence in its capabilities. It is not surprising that after the defeat in Normandy, the number of suicides among German officers sharply increased. Military defeat is one thing, but the complete collapse of a worldview is quite another. Beyond numerical superiority, German officers were astonished by the technological gap that highlighted Germany's backwardness. Proximity fuses transformed anti-aircraft artillery into precision weapons. Naval radars allowed targets to be engaged at significant distances from the coast with the first shot. DUKW amphibious vehicles solved logistical problems that seemed insurmountable to the Germans. But what particularly impressed German officers was the Allies' use of specialized equipment. Hobart's funnies, modified tanks designed for mine clearing, bridge laying and bunker destruction, solved tactical challenges through engineering ingenuity rather than brute force. Throughout the bloody Normandy campaign, German commanders lived in a constant nightmare caused by the devastating fire of Allied naval artillery. The mighty 16-inch guns of the British battleship HMS Rodney unleashed shells weighing over a ton on the enemy, striking targets up to 37 kilometers deep into occupied France. American battleships USS Nevada, USS Texas, and the British HMS Warspite turned their main armaments into deadly instruments capable of obliterating virtually any target. German artillerymen, desperately trying to retaliate and suppress the fleet's firing positions, quickly realized the futility of their endeavor. The ships constantly maneuvered, changing positions, and in response unleashed a barrage of destructive fire on enemy positions. By midsummer 1944, the movement of German troops during daylight hours had become an extremely risky undertaking. Allied fighter-bomber squadrons, guided by forward air controllers, descended with lightning speed upon any detected target. The numbers spoke for themselves. The Allies had over 12,000 aircraft in the theatre of operations, while the Luftwaffe could only field a paltry 300 of the 500 machines against them. Allied aircraft conducted between 5,000 and 8,000 sorties daily, while German pilots, when able, managed only 50 to 100 flights. The final figures of the Normandy operation reveal the scale of industrial warfare and the triumph of Allied forces. Between June 6th and August 30th, 1944, 2,299 soldiers, 438,471 vehicles, and a colossal 3,982,589 tons of supplies were transported to the continent. Allied air forces conducted over 480,000 sorties, providing air support. The Wehrmacht suffered significant losses. 240,000 soldiers fell on the battlefields. 200,000 were taken prisoner. 2,200 tanks and assault guns were lost, and over 40 divisions were routed. A decade after the memorable D-Day in 1954, surviving German army officers gathered in Bonn for a closed symposium dedicated to analyzing the Normandy campaign. General of Infantry Günther Blumentritt, who served as Chief of Staff under both Rundstedt and Kluge, presented the key report. In his speech, he emphasized, "In Normandy, we realized that the nature of war had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a confrontation of armies, but a competition of economic models. We operated with a number of divisions, while they considered the output of factories. We evaluated bravery, and they measured production volumes. The image that still stands before my eyes is American bulldozers pushing our knocked-out tanks aside to clear the way for supply convoys." D-Day left an indelible mark on the memory of German officers, forever changing their worldview. Hans Speidel, once a Wehrmacht soldier, later became a NATO general, playing a key role in integrating West Germany into the Western Alliance. Many Normandy veterans, realizing the colossal superiority of American industry, became ardent proponents of European economic integration, seeing the pooling of resources as the only chance for European states to compete with the USA. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy, noted a significant difference between the Italian campaign and the battles in Normandy. In Italy, due to the terrain, German forces could offer the Allies respectable resistance. However, in Normandy, on open ground, where the enemy could fully utilize its industrial might, German forces were simply annihilated. On June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of the Allied landings, Walter Olmsson, a former Wehrmacht officer, returned to the Crisbeck battery as an honored guest. Oberleutnant Sori, then 73 years old, stood once again at the observation post from which he had once witnessed the approaching invasion fleet. Addressing the assembled veterans, both Allied and German, he shared his reflections on what he had experienced. 4 decades earlier, he had stood on that very spot and witnessed something incredible. The sea was dotted with ships stretching as far as the horizon. At that moment, it dawned on him that everything he had previously known was a lie. Powerless nations could not build 7,000 vessels. Disparate states could not organize such a massive invasion. He and his comrades fired their guns at this armada, but their efforts seemed futile, like trying to stop the tide by throwing stones into it. They managed to sink 1 destroyer and damage several of the ships. Yet for every vessel they disabled, hundreds more passed unhindered. Today, young officers study the tactics employed in Normandy. But the main lesson lies elsewhere. In modern warfare, victory goes to the side with the greatest production capabilities. It became evident that industrial potential is the foundation of military power. The countless ships he saw that morning represented not merely an invasion fleet, but a vivid demonstration of American industrial might. German officers who watched the approach of nearly 7,000 Allied ships on D-Day witnessed not just the beginning of an invasion. They saw a coming era in warfare where industrial potential overshadowed all other factors. The image that haunted their nightmares, this unimaginable armada stretching to the horizon, was a visible embodiment of the unleashed, hitherto hidden power of democracy, industrial power directed towards military objectives on such a scale that traditional martial virtues lost their significance. Instead of a triumphant march across Europe, they were destined to confront the unyielding might of American industry. German officers observing this armada realized with terrifying clarity that they were witnessing the sunset of an old era of warfare and the birth of something entirely new. The industrial war unfolding before their eyes rendered all their professional experience hopelessly obsolete. Their defeat was determined by a lack of resources, not military prowess. They were let down by industry, not tactics. The cause of their collapse was a deficit of trucks, not a lack of courage. This harsh lesson was forged in steel and written on the waves of the English Channel on June 6, 1944. Nearly 7,000 ships heralded the arrival of American industrial might in Europe, after which the world could never be the same.